On this week's episode of the Autohaus podcast, I bought the car because of the anime. This is part 2 of the Autohaus AE86 origin story. In this episode, I will talk about the buying experience of this car. My best childhood memories were from media, specifically television and manga, with my standout favorites being Power Rangers and the G1 Transformers. We're spoiled by how easily accessible media is today, especially media from other countries. As a child, I had to hope the video rental place had the specific VHS in stock, or I had to hope that I was watching TV at the right time in order to catch a rerun episode that I had missed the first time around. My only source for foreign movies and anime were the small mom-and-pop Asian video rental shops that were also typically full of bootlegs and porno. Anime was especially tough to source, but for some reason, my local public library had a stock of dubbed manga. And behold, my first introduction to Initial D. Keep in mind, during this era, Tokyopop got the English language license, and thus the birth of the Americanized names and funky translations. Takumi became Tak, Mogi Natsuki became Natalie, Itsuki became Iggy, and drifting became slammin'. But as a youth, I honestly didn't care, and I don't think I truly understood what I was reading. But something about the cars, the art style, the storyline, and the girls really hooked me to keep coming back to this manga. Fast forward to high school, and I was still reading Initial D manga from the public library. I even had a friend we called Slick Nick, whose mom was dating some guy who I think worked at Funimation or some other big anime company. So that's how Nick ended up having this random assortment of Initial D DVDs. None of them serialized, of course, so you never knew who ended up winning or what happened next after this episode. But I enjoyed all those DVDs regardless. As a side note, I always remember one conversation I had with Slick Nick regarding something about Initial D. And I remember him saying with a chuckle and this sly grin on his face, "Aw man, Natalie, that slut." Fast forward some more to my early 20s, and I am a Subaru dealer technician, and my quality of life has gotten a lot better. Between the ages of about 17 to 20 years old, I felt like I really lost myself. And only now, where things in my life were starting to stabilize for the most part, I became a lot more clear-headed, which allowed me to rediscover things I had previously enjoyed. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me that this would be a good time in my life to start seriously looking into buying my childhood poster car, the AE86 Toyota Corolla. And fast forward once again to my appointment to check out this quote-unquote dream car. My two friends and I arrived at the location, and in the corner of my eye, I spot the car. Elation! But upon closer inspection, disappointment? Heavily faded red paint that looked like an old stick of chalk. Aged, creased, and sun-damaged exterior plastics. Various rust spots, and an interior filled to the brim with trash. And what the hell was this, a tow hitch? Oh man, I said to myself as I winced. But as I saw the body lines of a hatchback, and as the GTS twin cam decals tugged at my heartstrings, I was still full of optimism, and right on cue, Eurobeat seemed to start to play in the background, and my heart began to race. The owner was a friendly older Asian gentleman. Apparently, he was pursuing his master's at the nearby university. Why was he selling the car, you ask? He had just recently lost one of his regular forms of income, and his apartment complex would only allow him one parking spot. So, he made the tough decision to keep his daily driver 2000s era Corolla and sell his beloved AE86 Corolla. The exact details of the transaction are a bit fuzzy, but I will list some highlights of our meeting. I remember being invited inside and seeing a literal tidal wave of trash inside his apartment that engulfed one entire wall. All of a sudden, the car being packed full of trash made sense. This guy had some sort of hoarding disorder. And with that realization came a better understanding, along with a heavy heart for this gentleman. We talked inside. He showed me his stack of paper photographs, including him in his cap and gown right next to the vehicle parked right outside, although in sparkling showroom fresh condition. I also remember him going over the thick stack of repair orders and receipts, and him being adamant about how well the vehicle had been cared for, and that his paperwork physically proved it. I specifically remember at one point he pulled out another duplicate owner's manual and stated to me, "Look at this. The old owner's manual was so worn, I bought another one. Who do you know is that fucking crazy to do that?" And then came the road test. And what a road test it was. An hour at the very least, since we drove from Mr. Lawrence's place all the way to the other side of town. Again, details of what we exactly talked about during this road test are a bit fuzzy, but I do remember that he really liked to rev out the car everywhere. I mean, he pretty much never let the car under 4,000 RPM. On the highway, he was once again adamant about how in good condition the car was, how healthy the engine was, and how the steering did not shake on the freeway. He even grabs my hand and put it on the steering wheel to prove it to me. Initial D never came up in our conversations, so I was curious about how he knew to price the car. When I asked him, he shared with me that to his great frustration, he would regularly get followed, flagged down, and constantly asked by strangers if he was selling the car. And then, at some point, the conversation shifted into a talk about life. He talked about his life during the ownership of the car, from start to finish. Getting this car as a gift, moving to another state with this car, the trials and tribulations faced with maintaining this vehicle, and his own personal educational and athletic goals and how they intertwined with the ownership of this car. One notable point of guidance Mr. Lawrence gave me was the dangers of white women. Mr. Lawrence warned me in an even-tempered, well-meaning tone, as a father would give to his son. All of a sudden, you are tempted by that smooth, white skin. But don't give in to that temptation, because they are really the devil in disguise. And after an exhausting excursion of a road test through commute traffic and a whirlwind of a conversation, we finally arrived back at Mr. Lawrence's apartment. It was during price negotiations that I found out that the vehicle had failed its last emissions inspection. As a reminder from Part 1, and for those not native to California, for transfer of title, the seller has to complete and pass an emissions inspection. Definitely a monumental burden, as who knows what Beelzebub of a problem could be causing an 80s car to fail an emissions test. But after all this, I was still determined that this was the exact AE86 Toyota Corolla that I wanted. So we ended up agreeing on a price. He would knock off $500 and I would take it upon myself to fix the emissions failure. Satisfied, Mr. Lawrence requested I give him a few days to clear out the belongings in his vehicle before I took possession of the car. Fast forward to the day I returned to meet Mr. Lawrence, and he tells me that he left a few things in the car, since he knows that I work at the dealership and have an easy access to a dumpster. To put this in context, a few things ended up being 5 full garbage bags of trash. And under all this trash, an open quart bottle of oil that had emptied its contents onto and into the back seat bottom. For all you guys who wonder why my car has a blue SR5 rear seat bottom, now you know. We said our goodbyes and Mr. Lawrence wished me well and made me promise to take care and cherish the car. And a few days later, he even sent me a kind email, to which I paraphrased in the end of Part 1 of the Origin story. My drive home wasn't that long, but it seemed so as I was crawling with emotions. It was a cold winter's day, with a light rain outside. The sealed beam headlights were like trying to illuminate the night with a birthday candle, as the wipers smeared the gunk across the windshield. The defogger barely worked, as a steady stream of mystery particles were dispensed from the forward-facing air vents and directly into my face. The interior smelled of old, decay, and rot. And all the while, I thought to myself, this really doesn't feel like the anime. I parked the car in front of my house, looked back, and thought about the many terrible choices I had just made. My high interest rate personal loan, the time thrown to the wind, combing through Craigslist and coming up empty so many times. Not to mention the terrible drive home. But as I looked back, I didn't think the car was a terrible choice. I told myself that I would sleep on it and come back to it tomorrow. Maybe there was more to discover about this car that a few drives around town would not yet reveal to me. And maybe, just maybe, I could still be the underdog hero in this anime. That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, as reviews really help support us. You can do it straight from your desktop. Don't even need an Apple device. This is Autohaus Z. Thanks for all the support, you guys.